And what do you know? Here we are again. So, in this section, we're going to start our next big topic. But before we get into it, I want to remind you of something that we spoke about, could be a long time ago. So, when we started this course, we discussed what a component was, and I had said something like a component can be a functional component or a class-based component, and that we use these to produce some content to show the user. And we also handle feedback from the user. You remember? All right. We've only spoken about what a functional component is up until now, and we've only just seen how to produce some JSX to show the user, but not handle any feedback or updates. So what do you say? In this section, we're going to start to discuss class-based components and how we can use them to somehow manage feedback from the user or from other systems inside of our program, and then have it update how our components are rendering content on the screen based on some of that new information, or all of it, for that matter. Okay? So I want to first give you a quick overview on the differences between functional components and class-based components. One of the more challenging things to do when you are a beginner in the world of React is to decide whether to use a class-based component or a functional component. So I want to try to teach you some of the quick and easy rules that you can use in order to discern your component usage. So we can say that we want to use functional components anytime that we are trying to show simple content to the user without a lot of logic behind it. Now, everything that we've done so far, like I said, are pretty much all examples of simple components that we just create some amount of JSX and return it. So if your goal in creating a component is just having some simple content show up, then you're not going to go much further. You're going to pretty much stick with a functional component, right? However, you're probably going to want to do more than just that. So that's why we have another type of component called the class-based component. So if you plan on getting wild with your creations, you're not going to do just simple content. You're going to use a class-based component. So in other words, if you have any complex logic, if you have anything that needs to respond to user input, if you have anything that needs to make network requests, anything in these regards, chances are you're going to want to make a class-based component. So why do I keep hammering that? Why don't I just show you how to do it? I know you're asking, what's the difference between the two? Why do we have to choose one or the other? So I want to highlight some of the pros and cons of, both approaches. In that way, you will be able to make a fast and equitable choice. In my opinion, one of the biggest reasons to use the class-based components is that we get an easier time to organize our code. That's in general. It's not always, but it's usually organizing our code is a little more straightforward. Now, personally, when I look at a functional component, if there ends up being a decent amount of helper functions, a helper function right here, and maybe we've got another one underneath of it with the same amount of code inside of there, and then it can be, let's just call it rather challenging to merely take a glance and figure out what's going on inside of here. However, with a class-based component, it's a little bit easier to read as an engineer. But that one is totally subjective. So don't want to, persuade you one way or the other. Don't want to waste any more time talking about it. But I do want to include some of the other benefits of class-based components, and that is that they can use the state system in React, which is something that we haven't learned yet, but we'll get to it. So right now, we can just barely understand that the state system is something that we can use to make it easier to handle user input and then update our application. Now, another benefit is understanding lifecycle events. Now, that's another thing that we haven't discussed yet, I know, but we're going to discuss these two things pretty quickly later on. But right now, just basically understand that a lifecycle event just means that it's easier to do some of the tasks when our application first starts up. So that's the gist of some of the benefits of using class-based components. But to be honest with you, understanding the difference between these two things is just nearly impossible until you see some very good examples of both of them. So why don't you just take a quick break right here, and we will continue talking about components on the other side.